And I think once we all recognize that we have wings and we can open them up and we can fly, then we can really start to test the heights and the horizons of where we can fly to. But the truth is, that journey, that freedom to fly sits within. It isn't governed by what we experience or what we achieve outside in life. If we're not responsible for creating new stories that we can pass on, our stories are going to be set for us. In a world where information and access and guidance is ever more technology driven, if we don't find the spirit of our stories on what we think we know are going to be told to us. So I think the communal aspect of it's very difficult to really authentically be aligned in the process. For me, an uncomfortable truth is whether it's that inner whisper, whether it's that feeling, there's a sense of really knowing what's available, but it's being brave enough to do it and having the faith in yourself. And what I've learned personally is to have more faith in the process and have more faith in the emergence of what's meant to be. And when you release that tension, when you move from a situation of position into posture, that it, not only does it tune in more to who you are and it feels more true.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Uncomfortable Sunday. This time will be held in English as I have a special guest here. And if is this your first time here, this is not a place for motivation. It's not a place for quick fixes, and it's definitely not a place for pretty and curated stories. This is a space where we talk about the thoughts that show up on a Sunday evening, maybe around 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. When the noise fades, when the week is about to begin again, and when you're left alone with yourself. Those doubts, those tension, the things that you avoid saying out loud. So here we talk about these kind of things, the uncomfortable truths, the real ones. So today I'm joining by someone I genuinely respect, and not just for what he does, but for how he thinks. And we met during the DiMartini method training in 2023, I guess. Yeah. And in a space that it was all about transformation. Uh, what it was very that we kept in touch, we stayed in touch, and the depth of the conversations were really nice. So because when you meet people who have gone through real life transitions, you really can feel it. And Mark is one of those people. So, Mark, I'm really glad that you are here with me. Thank you for accepting this invitation as the first a guest in this podcast. So, before we go into the uncomfortable space that we want to discuss, I don't want a title. I don't want a polished version of yourself. Who are you, Mark? And who are you when you are not trying to explain yourself? And what kind of work are you doing today from that place?
Okay, well, thank you, Monica, for the invitation. I'm honored to be your first guest. I guess who am I? I'm just like everyone else. I'm a human trying to navigate this experience of life. I currently, I'm the founder of I guess it's a company, but it's a practice called Inner Wisdom. It's something I developed a couple of years ago. And the idea is we help people seek to explore, experiment, and experience who they truly are and who they truly should be. Just because I think generally in life, we are led in certain directions. There are certain structures that we are encouraged to follow. And in many cases, that doesn't really give us the chance to really explore who we truly are. So that's the genesis of Inner Wisdom. In terms of uncomfortable truths, I think I'll just let you ask the questions and I'll try and share at least my experiences or thoughts around each of those points.
Okay, thank you so much for your introduction. And I like to take this conversation exactly where this podcast lives into things that people feel but rarely say. And I really appreciate, Mark, that you are so authentic and honest, and you give yourself the permission to be so authentic. So now, if you agree, Mark, let's go into a few uncomfortable Sunday truths. And I have prepared for you 5 questions about your personal transformation and life transitions. So I'll start with the first one, which is, what is one truth about personal transformation that people only understand after they've been forced through it and not when they choose it? So what is the truth about one truth that you have about your personal transformation?
Okay, just thought come to mind. I think for me, what I've realized post these transformations is the opportunities for that transformation has always been present, but it's typically sat on the other side of fear, what I was looking to avoid, and a form of resistance. So it was always kind of sitting there, and there was a resistance to really address it and step through it. And I think what I've learned is when you do that, on the other side of that, not only do you recognize that those fears were in many cases unjust, but you realize you have the opportunity to step into that new realm for an extended period of time. And I think on a personal level, I've always been someone that, for whatever reason, has had a tendency to sit in situations longer than perhaps I needed to or should have, both in my professional and personal life. And I think I've discovered that once you make that change, or in many cases, the changes are enforced upon you, that's when you're actually driven to kind of step into that challenge. So I think it isn't, for me, an uncomfortable truth is, whether it's that inner whisper, whether it's that feeling, there's a sense of really knowing what's available, but it's being brave enough to do it and having the faith in yourself.
The next question for you is, when people are in the middle of a life transition, what is the illusion they hold onto that actually keeps them stuck? As you know, as you also know, that I'm working with professionals, with people that feel that they have the illusion that they are stuck into a life transition. What is your perception about this? What is that actually keeps them stuck? Sorry.
Yeah, no, well, I guess in terms of the life transition process or the stages, I think it's easy for us to be stuck in not stepping into that transition. And it can also be challenging when we're actually in that transition and we're stuck. At least for me personally, I think, in cases where I've been stuck or I've been slowed or I've questioned myself during those transitions is when I've been overly influenced by trying to control the eventual outcome. So whether it's fear driven or incentive driven, what is it I want the outcome to be? And when that's not feeling as if that's working, or I need that sense of control, that's when I've tended to, I think, to feel stuck. And what I've learned personally is to have more faith in the process and have more faith in the emergence of what's meant to be. And when you release that tension, when you move from a situation of position into posture, not only does it tune in more to who you are and it feels more true, but actually, it speeds up that process as well. I think that's the case for me in kind of so many facets of life, right? When you're at school and you're studying for exams, it's the pressure of what's the outcome? What does this mean if I don't succeed? If you're in a job and you're looking to get promoted or it doesn't feel like it's the right place for you, should you change your job? There's the fear around, well, what does change evolve? What risks am I looking to take? So, I think, and probably most deeply is in our personal relationships. Why are we willing to hold on? What are we looking to still try and save? And I just think that, as humans, we've lost our faith in natural cycles and natural emergence and conditions. We're always trying to over control from a sense of our perspective, which often is a kind of singular point of reference as opposed to tuning into that flow, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I love that, to have trust, to have faith in the process. I really love that.
Well, I think the key to that is having trust and faith in ourselves. It's very difficult to really authentically be aligned in the process if you don't have at least the confidence or are willing to open up and have trust and faith in yourself. And I think that's something that we all struggle with.
Yeah, Okay, thanks a lot. So, going to the third question, uh, as we talked a lot about change and personal and professional transitions, what is the real cost emotionally, mentally, or even relationally of staying the same when life is clearly pushing you to evolve and to get to your next version of yourself?
Yeah. It's funny that I was thinking when you were mentioning earlier in the introduction around the Sunday 6 p.m. perspective.
Yeah.
And I think the real cost is that you don't only start thinking about it at 6 p.m. So when there's a feeling that something isn't right, something isn't true, something needs to change, that tension, that feeling, not only does it arise at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, it arrives at 6 a.m. every morning. It's the first thought that
Mm.
comes to mind. And I think that's a signal and a message as opposed to a necessarily a negative drain. But the failure for us to kind of recognize and honor that signal or message becomes an energetic drain.
Mm.
And we start to get into this conflict between what we feel and what we think we know. And I think that can be incredibly exhausting. And what we really lose is we lose time and we lose the opportunity to really develop that confidence and trust and inner faith. And I think once we do that, once we start to build a repository of actual truths for ourselves, that's when we start to kind of grow and become more confident. So I think the real cost is anxiety and tension and resistance to what we know, and then the time of and the confidence of stepping into that.
Yeah, I guess many of our audience will resonate with what you are saying. Thanks for the new perspective. 6 a.m. I think it's, yeah, indeed. People have this thought every morning, but
It's the first thing we wake up, right? Well, typically, I
yeah,
think for many of us, whether it's there's an actual loss, there's a fear, there's a conditional tension, we're reminded, our subconscious, our nervous system says, hey, don't forget, it's important.
mm, yeah,
And, once that's released, I think it not only does it kind of fill the hole of that energy drain that we're emitting every day, it becomes an attribute or an element in the recognition that we don't need to be as fearful of things that we typically are. And that most of the time, all those life conditions that come from fears, we generate a sense of betrayal. The system isn't working for me. My boss is bad. My husband, my wife is unfair. That sits under a label of betrayal. And I think in many cases, when we step into and start to really think about that tension, that betrayal becomes a catalyst. And that can actually become the fuel and the recognition for us to step into that change.
okay.
But that's not easy. I mean, I've only personally discovered that in the latter part of my life. I think that's part of the lesson. We shouldn't be too harsh on ourselves as well in terms of our failure to step into this stuff. It's all part of that journey. It's all part of that part memory.
Okay, so speaking of failure, and maybe you also had this feeling that what was something that you had to let go and you didn't realize that was defining you until it was gone? That's a
Uh,
tough question, I know.
oh, yeah. No, I think as a guy, it's a sense of innate responsibility.
Mm,
So as a father, as a husband, you have a sense. So I think many of us have a sense that it's our responsibility to ensure that everything's protected. It's our responsibility to make sure that we're doing the best and we're trying to equip our family in the best way. And I think sometimes that can mean you become an overprotective parent, and you can also sometimes suffocate the kind of energy that sits in the relationship between you and your partner. So whilst it's all well intentioned, sometimes our kids have to fall over and kind of scratch their knee to learn that, one has to be a little more thoughtful around some of the risks that we take. But at the same time, we shouldn't say, hey, don't climb up that tree, or don't go into the woods because of ticks. I think that's what I've learned in terms of that, if that makes any sense.
Mm.
It's stepping back and be a lot more in presence and be available than it is necessarily trying to create and ensure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's brilliant. The last question that I would like to address, Mark, if someone is listening right now, it's Sunday evening, they feel that tension, even though you introduced the idea that it started at 6 a.m. They know that something has to change. So let's pretend that it's 6 o'clock when people are listening, or to this podcast. So they know that something has to change. They had this since this morning. They are resisting it. What is one uncomfortable truth that they probably don't want to hear now, but they need to?
One uncomfortable truth that they need to hear, but they don't want to hear.
Thinking
You know,
about
yeah,
transitions. Yeah.
yeah. Look, change is challenging, right? No one wants change. Change is fearful. We're brought up as subconsciously, even from babies and toddlers, to be attached, not to be exposed.
Mm.
And I think anytime there's a change, there's a risk. Of course, change also presents beautiful opportunities, and I think those are ideally should be embraced. But somewhere along the line, we've become overprotected and over nervous and over fearful. And I think the one thing that perhaps people want to hear is, even though these fears are there to protect us, in many cases, they're just an illusion. They're fears that we've outgrown. They're fears that we've inherited. And the actuality is, everything in life, I believe, sits between our fears and our choices. And most of our choices are governed or shaped by the fears that we have, which are associated to the losses that we don't want to experience. And I think if we can just learn to recognize those fears, honor those fears, because they're there in many ways for a productive sense. There's a reason why they're there. They're trying to be constructive in their protection. But if we can kind of teach them to stand down, and we can say to them, thank you, but we know this fear no longer serves me. We can work on diluting those beliefs or that inheritance that we may have carried around those fears. Then suddenly things can change. And I think in many ways, the way to do that is through just small incremental changes. To develop that confidence, to honor but release that fear, sometimes comes from these little changes. And for me, those changes have come from taking a slightly different posture, looking at things a little differently, trying something subtly a little different, and seeing what experience emerges from that. And it's that experience, that slight variation in perhaps how I feel, or someone else in a relationship feels, or a circumstance at work feels. Those small incremental changes in experience start to develop the confidence, and from that confidence, that starts to neutralize the fear. So I think for me, the answer is try not to be fearful, recognize that's a difficult process, but slowly lean into it and see what emerges. If you don't start, it's unlikely to change. That's probably the uncomfortable truth. And it's just going to continue to grow. And I think what happens in life generally is when we continue to resist those tensions, those recognition of needs to change, sometimes there's a life event that has to come and shift us. And sometimes that's losing someone, whether it's in a relationship or someone in our life who's been important, or a sense of identity through losing our job. The universe, or whatever it is that governs the environment in which we experience life, forces us to finally address that fear. And that becomes, I think, a little bit of a threshold moment. I think increasingly we can learn to address that before that life event has to hit. And it becomes more of an intersection where we can start to use our choices and build into those. So I don't know. That's what comes to mind. Hopefully that makes a little sense.
Of course, and it was really inspiring, the last answer. So I want to bring also this closer to you as a human. Beyond the work, your work, beyond the transitions as a concept, what have all these changes, these endings, beginnings, uncertainties actually taught you about yourself? And I know, Mark, that you are based in the United States, right? And you also had many experience, yeah, a lot of experience. You also worked on the Wall Street, and you also work with people. So, what actually taught you about yourself all these changes in and transitions in your life?
Yeah. It's a simple answer, but I guess it opens a lot of doors. So perhaps that's a discussion for another time. But I think what all these experiences have taught me is I've never really known who I truly am. And I'm
Okay.
now starting to learn who I am and who I can be. And I
Okay.
think that's as a result of, the inherent lessons that have been included in the life journey that I've followed, the beliefs that have been nurtured around us and enforced upon us. When we first go to school, we're set with a formula of if then, if you work hard and perform hard, you can. If you don't, this will happen. And I think that creates a artificial version of who we truly are. We tend to follow these disciplines and these rituals and these practices, which are very much aligned to society. And there's good reason for that, but I think times are changing now, where we're actually being called and asked, who are we truly? What are we capable of? What makes us feel good? So I think, once again, the answer to that is all those experiences and all those years are presenting the truth that I've yet to really experience who I truly am. And I kind of think about that, and this is how I relate that through to people I work with in their wisdom. I've never truly had the chance to open my wings. I've never even realized that I had wings. And I think once we all recognize that we have wings and we can open them up and we can fly, then we can really start to test the heights and the horizons of where we can fly to. But the truth is, that journey, that freedom to fly sits within. It isn't governed by what we experience or what we achieve outside in life. So, yeah, once again, hopefully that makes sense.
Of course, and thank you for the inspiring answers. And I know that you are also supporting people through their own transitions and you work. And I think it matters because your guidance is important when you are in the middle of uncertainty. So, if someone from the audience resonates with what you are saying, where can they find you, Mark? And how can they work with you?
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll add some contact details to the show notes, our website, and our social media accounts. People can work with us in really three ways. We do one-to-one, I call them co-mentorships, because I think what we seek to do is we're not looking to teach or tell. We don't think we know everything. We're constantly learning ourselves. So we view ourselves more as guidance people, helping people find their own direction as opposed to telling them this is what you need to do. So those co mentorship programs are really things that either people are looking to expand on, there's something they find interesting or need to change, or there's an intersection, there's a life decision, or there's a threshold. Hey, I've lost my job, I've lost someone special to me, I'm going through a divorce or separation. So those are the one-to-ones, and then we have programs where it's a group coming together. And then we're starting to develop our communities, which we're really excited about. That's where we're bringing people together, which I think is the most powerful and nutritious environments, where people who in many cases have never met before and who never actually might meet can come together and open and share. We're looking to reestablish that village fire concept of where people are willing to come around, sit around, open up, and once again, be willing to share and provide support to one another. So I'll share with you the details. We don't work with a particular type of person at a particular life stage, because what we've tried to do is think about what are the domains, dynamics, and disruptors that go on in life, and we try to meet people where they are. So thank you for the opportunity to share that, who we are and how we can be contacted.
Great, thank you. And I really love this concept of, how did you say, the village fire?
Well, I think, look, I mean, once again, it's a whole nother discussion, right? Before industrialization, before we were all put into factories or mines and we were split off, we acted as tribes.
Yeah.
All around the world. And we came together. And I think part of that tribalistic ritual of sitting together as a community is we were willing to share stories and create new stories. And I think that's where we really are in the world now. We have to protect the stories, our inheritance of stories, of lessons, all the way back. And we have to create new stories. If we're not responsible for creating new stories that we can pass on, our stories are going to be set for us. In a world where information and access and guidance is ever more technology driven, if we don't find the spirit of our old stories, our stories on what we think we know are going to be told to us. So I think the communal aspect of cultivating share and stories is going to become ever more important.
This is brilliant. And this will be in, you are from the audience, if they want to find your work and they find you physically.
Well, physically, I live just outside of New York, but nothing needs to be done physically. So we have a couple of groups running now. Our plan is to grow those. We don't view this as a business as such. We view it as a practice and a service. And what we're hoping is, the idea behind Inner Wisdom is not just to have coaches that are available for you to select. You know what? I'd really like to share this experience I had or this skill that I developed, but I don't know where to start. Come and talk to us, and we'll provide the infrastructure potentially and the means by which you can start to develop and share and sit around that fire circle. So it's an that's the general idea. And if there's a need for it and people seem to find it productive, then we are limitless in our ambition. But once again, it's not about 2 or 3 individuals sitting at the top of this pyramid. It's about a growing kind of cyclical spiral of growing kind of strength, where people once again can come together and connect, and we can find that unity, which we all know is the primary driver of how we feel positive and productive.
Great. So you will find all the links in the description. Thank you, Mark, again for accepting this invitation and for inspiring people with your answers. I think it was really valuable. And for sure, we will do another episode, depending on the subject. We will see. We have many subjects, right, Mark, to discuss. And I think...
And I think the other thing as well, and I mean, we discussed this earlier, when you load this up onto YouTube, if people have thoughts or questions, my Romanian is unfortunately non-existent, but if anyone has any questions or want to share comments, if it's okay with you, we can respond to those and once again tap into that communal model.
Exactly. So please add your comments, your thoughts, your complaints, everything in the comment section. We will be really glad to answer to them and to connect with you. So, my name is Monica. I'm unconventional mindset coach and I talk about uncomfortable things on purpose. That was Uncomfortable Sunday. And if something you heard today made you pause or made you feel something, or maybe you have resentments, maybe you even made you uncomfortable, this conversation did its job. So, because it was not about feeling good, it was about being honest. So, Uncomfortable Sunday, it is about these quiet moments on Sunday evening, or as Mark suggested, on each morning, 6 a.m.
Hopefully
So,
not. Hopefully not. Hopefully you can get beyond that. But once again, I think once you get to that 6 a.m. calling, once you get to that sense of resentment, that's when you know that's a tension that you should probably address.
okay. So, see you in the next episode. Thank you, Mark, and see you next time.
Thank you, Monica.